Yo, what's up, everybody? Dr. D with the mini Dr. D today. So, today we're going to talk about gluten. And why the heck do I have my son here, Apollo, to talk about gluten? Why are we going to talk about gluten today? Because I want him to be the healthiest and smartest man possible. So, there's things that I need to do for his life to get him healthier. One of them right now is giving back to his grandma before he gets a little agitated. But we're going to talk about gluten today. All right? Stay tuned. Apollo's back with his grandma, and we can get started. So today we're going to talk about gluten. Today we're going to go take a deep dive in gluten because gluten is such a problem. And but I know some people say, wait, but gluten's been around, 3, 4 thousand years. It's found in other grains like rye, barley, spelt, wheat. Um, but so, what are the issues with gluten? Well, let's talk about this topic a little bit because a lot of people think, oh no, I don't have celiac disease, so I don't have a gluten issue, right? Because in mainstream medicine, gluten is recognized as a problem when you have celiac disease, and then there's ways to diagnose it. Usually, you get scoped, and then they do a biopsy, etc. We're going to talk about different ways to actually see if you have it and maybe some of the ways that we're using nowadays to see if you have an issue with gluten are not all encompassing, right? Because some people say, I don't have celiac disease, I don't have an issue with gluten, therefore I can keep eating gluten. But then, a few weeks later, a few days later, they're thinking about, man, my skin isn't looking good. I'm tired, I'm fatigued, I can't focus, I can't concentrate. Or they see their grandparents developing issues like multiple sclerosis or ALS and things like that. And they're like, I don't know where this is coming from. But they also think, they continue thinking they don't have an issue with gluten. And sometimes that's just not really the case. So we're going to talk about this today. What is gluten, right? Gluten is found, it's a big protein, right? Found in many grains, like I was saying before, rye, barley, spelt, wheat. Um, and spelt's been around, for example, for years and years, thousands of years, right? But what's the problem with gluten today? Our gluten is contaminated. Why? Because for industry practices, for our bread, for example, to last longer on shelves, right? You're going to change a little bit the structure of that bread, right? Remember in the Holy Prayer, it says, "Give us this day our daily bread," right? So every day we would have to make fresh bread. Nowadays, if you guys notice, bread can live on the shelves for a really long time. And do the backyard test. I've mentioned this before in other lectures, but throw your food on the backyard and see if the bugs want it. Because if the bugs don't want it, maybe you shouldn't be eating it either, right? And that's a classic example. For example, take a Dorito or very processed type food, and you'll see you throw it on the backyard, bugs don't want it. But put a nice piece fresh avocado, it'll go fast. You'll go there the next day, well, not the next day, a few hours later, it's not there. But anyhow, going back to the gluten, so when you have issues with gluten, right, which again, I said it's found in certain grains, and where are those grains? It's in pasta, it's in potatoes, not potatoes, sorry, in bread. It's found in a lot of cookies. It's in starchy food. It's basically all over. It's almost safe to say it's like all over starchy food and a lot of the carbohydrates we like. Okay. So when you have these kind of foods, you're going to feel lots of times, for those of you that are sensitive, people are going to feel tired. They're going to feel, issues with concentration, etc. Um, and they can feel more short-term effects, like eat it and then all of a sudden feel very bloated, right? Like just a few hours later, super bloated, tired, sleepy, start yawning, and it's like, oh my God, especially college students, right? Or students in high school, etc. They eat whatever their lunch and then they're struggling to stay awake. They're yawning. Obviously, they're having a big insulin spike after food, which some people have issues with that. And go watch we have another lecture that I talk a lot about insulin spikes and sugars and so forth like that, which make you tired. But you can classically tell when it's due to gluten because if you don't eat the gluten and you don't get tired after food, hmm, that's a big clue, right? Versus the person that's having insulin spikes, let's say after lunch, which is classic, that 2, 3 p.m., like can't stay awake, that then there's usually something in the food. Um, which would be the gluten, or the person that just gets tired all the time. That's the insulin spike. But going back to the gluten, so gluten, will cause you some short-term effects to some people, but some people do not feel it at all. Some people do not feel it at all. And then the gluten on other people will cause long-term effects that the person has not associated. Sometimes they are feeling the tiredness and the fatigue and the bloating and all that stuff and over years, and then it pops out with an osteoporosis. So if you guys see on the screen right now, I'm showing you some research on how osteoporosis and gluten are highly connected. Okay, so if somebody's starting to develop osteoporosis, they usually go to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Oh, you need to walk more, lift some weights, etc." One of the basic things is get off of gluten. So I have another lecture, we're talking about osteoporosis and we're talking about vitamin D3, K2, etc., and the hormones. Now you can add on to that one, getting off of gluten. Gluten is so important to be away from if you're having osteoporosis issues. There's other people that start developing, girls with candidiasis, etc. And these things, Canada, number one, loves sugar, right? And there's certain diets that you can do, for example, for Canada, called the FODMAP diet, FODMAP. But here's the thing, you need to get off of gluten in a lot of these little infections that keep coming up. There's people that keep getting constant colds. I've seen people at our company that have come in, clients that have come in constantly getting colds. Every 2 to 3 weeks, max in a month, they would get a cold, they would get a cold, they would get a cold. We looked at their files like, hey, why don't you get off of gluten? We got them off of gluten, and all of a sudden the colds went away and they started living a better life. And we still follow up with this particular client maybe 2 years later, and we asked them, hey, the colds, it's no, gone, right? So gluten will wreak all kinds of effects on you, and gluten will cause issues, for example, to your skin. So I say gut, you say skin, right? I say this to our staff all the time because skin and gut are intimately connected. And here's the thing, gluten up until nowadays, we don't really make the connection, and a lot of dermatologists do not make the connection between skin and gut, but it's highly, highly connected. Okay, so when you're consuming gluten on a daily and a regular basis, right, certain people will start to develop skin issues, all kinds of different issues that can happen for skin. I'm going to go on a peptide tangent right now, being that I'm talking about skin. Two great peptides I really like for skin. KPV, especially, it's a great substitute for somebody that's taking corticosteroids for a long time for psoriasis. So really great peptide, love the peptide. I think it's only 3 amino acids long, tiny, tiny little peptide. And then another one is called GHK copper. GHK copper, amazing peptides for skin. Found in saliva, urine, and serum, heavily studied for many years. It upregulates collagen and fibroblasts in the skin, and it's actually one of the first peptides upregulated when there is an issue. It's basically the 911. When your skin has a little issue, it calls it GHK copper, and GHK copper turns on the genes to help regulate that skin to, let's say, reconstruct it. And it's classically used in our space in regenerative medicine to decrease fine lines and wrinkles and help even with hair regrowth. Anyways, that was a little peptide tangent. Going back, so there's no point in taking these peptides if you're not covering the basis. If you're having skin issues and you're still eating the gluten, okay? Just give it a shot. People with a lot of comedones or pimples as well, acne, gluten and acne are also intimately connected. But where's the biggest problem, in my opinion, that gluten is going to affect? Gluten is going to affect your brain because there's a phenomenon called leaky gut syndrome, right? Which is becoming more and more heard of now, still not by mainstream medicine. Gluten causes leaky gut. How does it do that? Well, gluten is such a big molecule. As it's passing through the membrane of the gut, it's causing breaks in occlutin and zonulin, which are the scaffolding proteins that are holding together those parietal cells, so the cells in the gut. So as gluten is breaking that, and you see there's a diagram right now on the screen, so you get an idea of what gluten is doing. Not only gluten can do that, many other things cause an issue at the leaky gut, at the gut border, causing leaky gut, and we'll have a separate lecture just on leaky gut. But today we're really hammering it on gluten. So as gluten breaks that barrier in the gut and causes the leaky gut, what happens is gluten comes out into the bloodstream. So now your immune system says, huh, in the blood, right? Imagine gluten, it's like somebody injects gluten into it's like injecting a Dorito or food into your bloodstream. Now your blood, which is supposed to be a pristine and it's an environment, it's supposed to be a sanctuary. All of a sudden, your immune system says, "Hey, that's gluten over there, right? What is that? Like, let's go after that. Is that gluten? What is it?" So then it starts calling over your T cells, especially, and your T cells get over there and they say, "Hey, buddy, I need you to get out of here." So take them out, right? And but then that keeps happening. The insult keeps happening, and the leaky gut starts to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And then there's more gluten coming in. Now what happens is you start hitting that blood with more gluten, and then the immune system, they're the security, they're taking them out, taking them out, taking them out. Now here's something interesting. Your immune system, he memorizes everything he's ever attacked, right? So he mounts an immunological response to that gluten, and he memorizes the code of amino acids that make that gluten, right? So let's go a little deeper. So those codes have names like transglutaminase, gliadin, glutenine, gluteomorphin, etc. So these names that I just said, you don't need to memorize that unless you're a health practitioner. Those names right there, gluten is composed of those things. So gluten is then memorized. So say transglutaminase, right? And then there's transglutaminase IgA, transglutaminase IgG. I don't want to get too technical on this, which is going to tell us basically an IgM, how long the response has been there, et cetera. But basically, your body goes and attacks this transglutaminase chain. So he's like, aha, transglutaminase. I need to get you out again. And he keeps doing this and doing this and doing this. Now, in medical school, I learned we have something called immune tolerance. Now, I really disagree with that because actually what starts to happen is your body starts to really attack that. And then all of a sudden one day, your body now looks at an egg. And then the body says to the egg, gluten. And your egg's like, huh? I'm not gluten. I'm an egg. And then your body all of a sudden looks at milk, right? Or casein, which is the protein in the milk that I specifically want to talk about now. And he says, gluten. Or he says transglutaminase, right? Remember that little bit more technical name, and I'm using one as an example. There's a few. And the milk and the egg, they're like, whoa, 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 buddy, you got us all wrong. Hey, cut that out. We're not gluten. We're cool. We're tight. The immune system says gluten and says, get the heck out of here, and starts attacking the egg or the casein or sorghum or buckwheat or hemp. There's a bunch of things that your body will create a polymorphism. Will start to polyreact. Okay, it will start to polyreact to different elements. Or if you went to traditional medical school or you studied medical sciences, it's called molecular mimicry. And we learn about this with certain bugs, right? If you get a streptococcus infection, can't it later affect the heart and cause rheumatic fever and so forth? Because the bug mimics certain molecules in the body, and then your body attacks itself. Right. So when it does that, you start to develop this cross reaction, this cross reactivity. And that's the classic person that says, hey, I removed gluten and I still feel like crap, right? Because now it's too late. You've started to cross react. So now you need to remove those foods. And there's specific testing for that, because that one's really hard to actually just tell the person, hey, remove the gluten and you'll be fine. You can tell the person go lifelong off of gluten and they'll normalize on the foods they're cross reacting, but it's going to be a little bit more tedious for the person, a little bit more complicated. If the person can, it's always interesting to do a gluten cross-reactive test to actually see the foods that they're cross-reacting. Now, there's another step. If you don't stop this cross-reactivity, now remember, the body first attacked gluten. Now it's attacking gluten and attacking the egg and attacking the milk and the casein and the sorghum and the buckwheat and the quinoa and the rice and all that stuff. It's polyreacting like crazy. And you're feeling like crap, you kind of don't really know why, and your doc's not really, usually, most docs are still not associating this. And then all of a sudden, a few years later, you cough up multiple sclerosis, or you cough up osteoporosis, or you cough up an whatever, a slew of different autoimmune diseases. Why? Because you've been attacking over the years gluten. You're like, what does that have anything to do with it? I'll give you an example. Remember that molecule transglutaminase? That's found inside gluten. Now, one day, your body's going to look, your immune system, right? It's your immune system. It's your body, but your immune system is going to look at the thyroid and say, gluten. And your thyroid's going to be like, whoa, 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 cut that out. You lost your mind. T cells, I am your buddy. I've been here all my life. I've been here for 30, 40, 50 years, whatever. I'm not gluten. And the T cells look at your thyroid again and say, gluten, I'm gonna take you out. And your thyroid's like, whoa, hold on, I'm not gluten. And this back and forth starts to happen, but the immune system doesn't care. And he starts to call over the big guns. He starts to call over the natural killer cells. Just the name, those cells are in your body. They're called the natural killer cells. You don't want to mess with those. And they start hitting the thyroid and attacking the thyroid. All of a sudden, you start developing antibodies to your thyroid. For example, anti-TPO antibodies, anti-thyroid peroxidase antibodies, anti-TSH, and so forth. What happens is now your body's getting attacked by itself. So what would we call that? Autoimmune. As far as I know, there's about 129 documented autoimmune diseases, and the number just keeps going up. So the things that we're eating are starting to catapult a series of events that are leading to these autoimmune issues, right? And causing us to literally have lives that we don't want to have. When we're praying for a life of abundance, a life of energy, a life of joy, a life of happiness, and then it's leading into more and more problems. Now I'm really going to go heavier with you guys. Now gluten, what it does, it causes that leaky gut, right? But if it passes the leaky gut, it goes into the bloodstream, then it can go into the blood-brain barrier. In this case, it's not always the same. Blood-brain barrier is very tricky. But in this case, it passes the barrier of the brain because it's passing the barrier of the gut. Now it can pass the barrier of the brain. And I know you guys watching this right now, you're like, uh-oh, yeah, uh-oh. That's a problem. Because then it starts to lead to problems. It can lead to big diseases down in the future, and it can lead into short-term problems. Now, what happens is you'll take a child, for example, that's developing, and they're in high school or whatever, and they're about to take their SATs, etc. There's studies showing how kids will get lower scores on their exams if they are exposed to gluten. Gluten is highly, highly, highly sensitive, or your brain is highly sensitive to gluten. Your brain's performance drops heavily with gluten. There's a lot of people that ask me, what neurocognitive peptides can I do? And there's great neurocognitive peptides, cerebrolysin, CMAX, C-Lank, dihexa. There's amazing neurocognitive peptides where I'm like, that doesn't matter if you're doing those. If and spend money on that kind of stuff if you're still consuming the crap that's slowing you down. You want to put a bigger turbo on the car but pull your e-brake up. Makes no sense. Makes zero sense in my head, right? So the whole point, if you want a high functioning brain, you get away from the gluten. And if you have children, like I just showed you my little boy, or our little boy, in the beginning of today's episode, to me, it's super important that he develops to be the top performer that he can be, that he has a life of abundance according to his his vision of what he wants. But for that, I need to empower him with the best brain and body that I can. And for that, I need to give him the best foods and nurturing that I can. So gluten is a serious, serious problem, guys, that's plaguing our children, plaguing our adults, etc. And and lots of times, I was just having a conversation with my parents, his grandparents, about not giving him gluten as especially in the first 2 years of life. There's so much research in regards to how sometimes somebody will have a liver issue, even something like HCC, hepatocellular carcinoma, when they're older, and it's correlated with the first 2 years of the foods that child took in, right, which caused issues to that adult later on. And the liver is so sensitive, it's so sensitive to gluten. So I'll give you another example. So, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which I know a lot of you guys have heard of this, or some of you guys are going through this, or maybe your doctor told you you had this. And basically, you don't drink alcohol and your liver enzymes are always elevated and you're having an issue with that. Well, get rid of the gluten, because your liver function starts to decrease with gluten. And over time causes some issues. As you can see, there's a little research article now on the screen talking about that. And for this article, there's millions of other articles. When I show you guys an article, I can pull up multiple other articles backing up the article that I'm showing you guys. So you guys do your own research. You guys go to googlescholar.com, not Google, go to googlescholar.com and go ahead and pull up all the research in regards to the things I always tell you. That's just a little tangent in regards to everything I tell you guys on these lectures. Don't believe a word I'm saying. Do your own research, educate yourself. But So now you ask me, how do I figure out if I have a gluten issue? Well, commonly people understand gluten issue as to being a problem with celiac disease, right? That's what it's called. Which, what is the definition? Basically, it's the atrophy of the villus border in the small intestine. So you can't absorb gluten, right? You can't absorb vitamins and minerals, etc., and it's caused because of the gluten. Okay, and there's even classifications, right? They call it Marsh classifications. There's Marsh 1, 2, 3, 4, and you'll see here on the screen some histological pictures of the villus atrophy. So they looks like these little fingers, these little tentacles, and they start to atrophy over time. And that's what is interpreted today to truly be an issue with gluten, according to mainstream medicine, etc. Which it's not wrong, but that's not all encompassing, because the issue to gluten was measured by having villus atrophy, the gut border. Now here's the thing: how about the effects of gluten on the brain? How about the effects of the gluten on the liver? How about the effects of the gluten all over the body? And that's what's been dismissed over the years. And nowadays we're saying, gluten is causing an issue in other issues in other areas of the body, especially for developing children, etc. And adults. As we age, we're starting to see that a lot of these issues are coming up. Okay, and there's another thing too that we've recently found out to be important is what happens is you do a biopsy, right? You get the scope and you do a biopsy to see if you have those issues at the brush border. Now, what happens is, imagine the intestine being a tennis court, and you take a piece of that tennis court, but then you see, wait, hold on, this is normal, so the person doesn't have an issue. How about the other side of the tennis court? How about over here next to this piece that just did a biopsy? Because sometimes the problem will manifest in one place. Doc, I don't know if that makes any sense. Really? So let's talk about the skin outside of the body. What do you mean skin outside of the body? Yeah, because your intestines are kind of like the skin inside of the body. We actually call it mucosa. So mouth to anus, it's basically the skin inside the body, and then there's the skin outside of the body. When you have an issue with your skin, does it show up all over your skin in one shot? Most of the time, no. It'll show up in different places. For example, psoriasis, right? Same thing with the skin or mucosa inside the body. You'll see that pattern of your body's alarm system, because your body's just trying to tell you something's wrong, right? You'll see that pattern inside the body as well. So now, what's the solution? So I'm a big fan of doing immunological studies. Some of the serological studies that we have nowadays, the more common ones, not so good. But there's really, really good companies, like one that I really like, Cyrix. Cyrix is really good. Vibrant. From what I understand, we don't have too much experience with them, but Genova is really good as well. And we can see that if the person is having issues with these certain the certain proteins that are inside gluten, so like transglutaminase, gliadin, gluteomorphine, glutenine, etc., and even more so, because for example in wheat, there's people that don't so much manifest an issue with gluten, but manifest an issue with wheat, right? Because there's other proteins inside of wheat, the farrinins and sarpins, etc., that are inside the wheat, and I'll mention those: farrinins, sarpins. Those are in the wheat, and they're similar to gluten, and people have issues with those too, because our wheat nowadays also is not clean at all due to industry practices, right? Remember, guys, we're living at a second agricultural revolution, and we're about to go into our third one. So the pesticides in the 70s, in the years 2000, the GMOs, and now we're going into 3D printed food and vertical farming. I mean, it's just, now it's getting even uh, let's say, advanced, and that's the problem. Lots of times you think science is advancing, but no, you advance practices here that are going to hurt you more, and then you advance the band-aids here a little bit more, and it just goes. And I don't really believe in that. I really believe in taking us back to the basics, back to nature, back to our ancestors' ways of thinking and habits here on this earth. Okay, and that's a safer way to live by. Now, so understanding how gluten impacts your life, you might want to consider changing your habits as it relates to eating gluten and putting gluten in your house, because gluten is definitely something that's ripping you from your abundance. It's ripping you from your energy. It's ripping you from your productivity. It's ripping you from your creativity, from your memory, and even from your future life and years here on earth. There's plenty of studies showing how gluten is not beneficial for you. Although it's ubiquitous, it's found all over the place, and it will be difficult for you guys to remove it. But especially for those of you that actually want to do the, some of those more comprehensive blood tests and understand what gluten does for you, um, understand if you come back positive, it's lifelong. Okay, it's something that you should be off lifelong. Yeah, sure, you can normalize it and get those tests back in the green, but then because they're color coded for the ones that we use, green, yellow, red, and it's important to be both quantitative and qualitative, meaning you want to see a degree, so a number, not just a color. You want to see a number associated to the reactivity that you have to that particular substance. In this case, we're talking about the molecules found in gluten, but understand that if it's positive, it's something for you to be off of lifelong. Okay. Now, also understand if you're positive, you have a very high chance. For example, if your brother is going to have a 20% chance increase chance of having it, gluten intolerance, if one brother has it, right? Because this is usually connected to a gene called HLA-DQ2 and HLA-DQ8. Okay, so I know I'm a big epigenetic guy, but your genes are involved because if you have that gene, it's easier for you to wake up and actually turn it, get a full-blown celiac disease, etc. Which again, the way I just said that might make you sound, oh, I don't have celiac disease, I just have a gluten intolerance. No, I consider it the same. I treat myself as if I had celiac disease. When I go out to eat, I was out with actually some friends last night and they were making fun of me. We were at an Italian place, how I would not touch the gluten, right? And they, I was on a table with 13 people, myself included, and they were making fun of me. So, but I am that guy. I'm the kind of guy that I won't touch that stuff just because I want benefits out of it. And it's something, don't think just because you're hearing me that my circle is perfect. No, not even in my family. This is something I have to preach, and this is something that you will have to walk this road alone. If you're married, in this case, forget your husband and wife, lead by example. And hopefully your family will follow. But I'm telling you guys, don't think it's an easy task. You will be sometimes plagued by friends and family for not eating the darn gluten because again, it's all over the place. Okay, so I want you guys to understand, for you to live a better and healthier life, gluten is definitely something that you guys should consider removing. Okay, it's connected, like I said, to so many diseases: osteoporosis, liver issues, brain development issues in children, heavy brain diseases, autoimmune diseases. I mean, it turns on the trigger for so many pathologies. So it's something for you guys to consider removing today. And it's something free. It's actually going to save you more than likely some money. Okay, because not eating a lot of that garbage, you're going to focus maybe eating some other stuff. And maybe even help you to produce more in life. Okay, because the goal is to have a life of abundance, a life that we live life on our terms, right? So consider today removing the gluten. Just give it a shot. After you turn this off, take inventory of what's in your cabinets, take inventory of where you order lunch from every day, take inventory of what you're putting in your body, and consider removing the gluten. And maybe even studying a little bit more about this to understand how you can improve your health and your life even more so. Because once you start studying one thing, like you start studying gluten, you're going to start studying other things that might be harming you, like excitotoxins, which we have a lecture for that, or toxic halides, which we have a lecture for that. All these things that are in our environment that are hurting us a bit. But today I'm going to ask you guys to get healthy, remove the gluten, and change your life. All right? And guys, don't forget, by your questions and your comments is what I know to record next on. Okay, so make sure you guys leave us some questions, some comments, etc. And if you need more help and if you want to get more in depth with this, reach out to us, reach out to Biohax, and we'll help you biohack a better life and live a healthier life. Love y'all. Dr. D.